Let's begin with some definitions. Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. Productivity is doing the right things in the right way with the right tempo or the right frequency. Doing the right things in the right way often enough, in simple terms. Now, we need all of those things, but within sales, they're normally either misunderstood or misapplied. So what I want to take you through is the tried and tested process that I use. And when I say tested, I mean tested, because when I do work for corporate clients, I guarantee that either their sales will increase by an agreed amount or the training's free. And if I'm going to do that, I need to be able to make sure that I can actually deliver. And the way I do that is through the same kind of techniques that I'm about to teach you. If you're serious about boosting your sales career and from that boosting your success and your earnings, the starting point is to have a solid, replicable sales process. So if you click the link that's down in the description and also in the comments, you can download the Deals sales process, which is the business-to-business system that I recommend to my customers. It's a free download. Click the link, add in your details, and it will appear in your inbox pretty much instantaneously. Enjoy. The bane of many salespeople's lives is activity targets, KPIs, key performance indicators. And it's not because they're not useful, they're incredibly useful. It's because people are measuring the wrong things in the wrong way. Now, measurement in itself is fantastic. If you're a runner, if you lift weights, if you swim, if you do anything physical where you want to get better at it, you need to measure. You need to know how fast, you need to know how far, you need to know how long. If you're doing something like losing weight, you need to know what you started at and where you're at now and how it's gone in between times. If you're trying to get better at anything, you need to know where you were, where you are, and if you're going to really nail it, you need to know how you got from one to the other. But measurement is not bad. It's just very often badly used. So let me go into exactly what we do and how we do it. The starting point to really becoming effective and productive is to have a process. If you don't have a sequence of steps, a sequence of things that happen, it's very difficult to measure and it's very difficult to get better. Let me give you an example. I went to work with a company recently and they sell a physical product, and their apparent sales process was pick up the phone, ask for orders. Okay, so the only things they were measuring was the number of times somebody picked up the phone and the value of the orders that came in. Well, that means that everything in between those two is a massive black box. We don't know that X equaled Y. I started to talk to their individual salespeople and look at their individual sales numbers. And what I found was that, yes, their lowest performing salesperson did the lowest number of calls. I also found that the second lowest performing salesperson did the most calls. I found that their highest earner, who'd outbilled everybody 7 months out of the 9 I was looking at, came somewhere between the two, which means that it's not just activity. It's about what they were doing. So what we did was to start from first principles. What comes before the phone call? How do you communicate with a prospect or a customer before the call? How do you decide who to call and what you're calling them about? Then once you're on the call, what is the sequence of things that takes place? Is there a fact find? What's it about? Is there a presentation of a product or a solution? What's it about? How do you try and close the deal? What's it about? How do you negotiate price? How does that work? What comes out the far end? And there was a series of 6 different steps that the best salesperson went through consistently. There was then a 7th that I added in that made their best salesperson suddenly pop. But there's always a process. It's just that we often don't realize what it is. You now have a sales framework from this masterclass. You have a process. Build rapport, fact find and diagnose the issue, prescribe and propose a solution, answer any objections, close the deal, or close this part of the conversation and move on to the next one, with the additional pro tip of adding in commitment steps or action steps in between times. So whether your sale is 10 minutes, 10 months, or longer, you now have a simple sales process, and you can measure how often you do each of those things with your prospects. You can measure how effective you are by seeing how much information you get and how well graded it is. And there's a number of different ways you can measure it. But if you don't have a process, you can just go, well, that's the revenue and that's the number of meetings, or that's the revenue and that's the number of phone calls. And that isn't a process, because X very rarely equals Y. So the process is absolutely crucial, because you can't do the right thing until you know what the right thing is. And you can't work out what the right thing is until you know what all the other things are. So efficiency is doing things right, effectiveness is doing the right things, and productivity is doing the right things in the right way at the right tempo. So we need that process, and we need to measure, and then we can start to improve. I'm going to let you in on a bit of a dark art. This is something that very few sales professionals and even fewer sales leaders really understand. And this little dark art is this is how I can go to large corporates who are very good at what they're doing and guarantee to improve their sales results. And it's really just an extension of what we've been talking about. So the first thing I do is to work out the sales process. Then I establish the numbers. How often do you go from step 1 to step 2? 10%. Okay. How often do you go from step 2 to step 3? 30%. Okay. From step 3 to step 4? 40%. Fantastic. 10%, 30%, 40%. Fantastic. And I put percentages or conversion ratios, whichever term you like to use. I just track those through for each step, because it's a sequence of steps. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In order to get to 2, you have to have been at 1. In order to get to 3, you have to have done 2 and 1. Simple. But each of those conversion ratios can be improved. So if I've got somebody who's got 10% conversion rate from step 1 to step 2, and I can change that from 10% to 11%. Doesn't sound like much, does it? It's not a lot. But if I take those numbers and I roll them through the rest of the process, I will have added more than 10% to their revenue at the far end. If everything else remained the same, I've added 10% by going from a 10% conversion rate to 11% conversion rate. See, that 1% increase, it's only 1%, but it's 1 is 10% of 10. I'm showing the graphics on the screen, hopefully that makes sense. But I'm not done, because what I do is I look for the lowest numbers as early in the process as possible. Because the later in the process it is, the more difficult it is to get a big impact. I'll explain why. Albert Einstein was once asked what was the most powerful force in the universe, and people expect him to say gravity or black holes or whatever, and he said compound interest. Because if you allow something to multiply by itself, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if I can achieve a 10% increase here, to go from 10% to 11%, and then I go from 30% to 33%, and 40% to 44%. So 3 lots of 10% improvement. What impact will that have at the end of the day? Most people say, well, 10%. But it's not, because the numbers multiply together. So what you actually end up with is more than 30% increase in the numbers that come out the far end, just by tweaking here and tweaking there and tweaking there. Now, 10% on some things is dead easy. So, for example, if it's number of dials to number of conversations, improving the conversion rate from making a phone call to actually speaking to a decision maker, I've got techniques that allow me to improve that dramatically for almost everybody. So I can get 25-30% increases there almost all the time. When it comes to getting people to open up about their issues, there may be a much smaller increase I can achieve there. I only get 4 or 5% there. But when I multiply them together, I get a big impact at the end. The mistake most people make is they try and get massively better at one thing. And if they could have, they would have. But almost everybody can get a little bit better at lots of things consistently. Efficiency is doing the right things. Productivity is doing the right things in the right way at the right tempo. So if I can get 3 or 4 little increases, I'll get a really outsized impact at the end. That's what I've done for a living for 30 years. And now you can do it for yourself. You just have to think through what the sales process is, gather the basic numbers, and then say, okay, what's the lowest conversion rate as early in the process as possible? The earlier in the process you start, the more chance you have to achieve some compounding, where the numbers multiply on themselves. So start as early in the process as possible. Start with the lowest number possible and try and get an increase. To go from 10% to 11%, it's easy, but it's still a 10% improvement. To go from 50% to 55%, that's hard, but it's a 10% improvement. And we're looking at percentages, not absolutes. So that's the way the science works. As I've been describing, the starting point to boosting your success and your earnings as a salesperson is to have a solid, repeatable sales process. If you click the link that's in the description and then the comment below, you'll have access to the free ebook about my deals process, which is the business-to-business system that I recommend for my corporate and business clients. Click the link, just add in your details, you get immediate access. It's completely free. Enjoy. If this video has been useful, and I really hope it has, hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell. You know the routine by now. You're not new to YouTube. But also, feel free to comment down below with any questions, any thoughts, any suggestions. I do read every comment that comes in, and I do reply personally. So please feel free to ask me any questions, put any comments there. I'll get back to you as quickly as I can do.